58, reporting on data. We will be able to report on data in frequency graphs. And, oh, I haven't finished off in this thing. We'll be able to report on data in frequency graphs and bar/column charts. While you guys are copying that down, I'm going to quickly read to you guys the fact for 58. So the hula hoop was invented in 1958. It is a toy that is swirled around the waist, limbs, and neck. The modern hula hoop was invented in 1958 by Arthur K. Spud, Mellin, and Roger Neer. Saying that of course they did invent this hula hoop, but children have been playing with hoops for a very long time. So it's not a new story. So bending a piece of stick into a circle is probably not the newest idea. I think I remember reading people used to use the ring that would go around barrels and hula hoop those. The only difference that these gentlemen did is that they made it out of plastic. And so if you think about it, if we're talking about mid-50s, plastic is a brand new material that's going everywhere. Everyone's using plastic. So to have a hula hoop made out of plastic that doesn't break and then selling it, it's a pretty good idea. It didn't really catch they probably didn't get too popular until about the 60s. But I still like, even now, if you go even now in the 90s and 2000s, 2020, there's still people using hula hoops. They didn't they didn't go completely out of fashion. When I say cool, I guess when I said people using hula hoops, I mean there are kids that take hula hoops to school and just play around with them. But they're still used in gym classes and stuff like that. I used to think so. I don't know. I haven't seen a hula hoop in a long time. I think my sister used to have one that was, I think it used to light up, and that was really cool. A hula hoop lit up, but I don't remember anymore, actually. Anyway, point was hula hoops, cool thing. Lesson 58, reporting on data. So before we do lesson 58, let's talk about what we did with data. Last time what we talked about when we dealt with data is we looked at how we can put data in a different format. So we mostly talked about the humble frequency table. Now, frequency table is just a list of scores against their frequency, or how many times that score came up. And it's a bit of a way that we can take univariate data, which just has one number, and start to understand it. If you think about this, it's well, we want to know how many times does that one number come up, or how many times does a number in a certain region come up. So when you're dealing with weight or something like this, like continuous data, we would use class intervals. I really should have written that down actually in the slide. It's good for continuous data. So, and I think it's called continuous wrong, but yeah. Continuous data is great for this type of thing because it means that you don't need to know exactly where something is. You just need to know approximately. So that's how you would that's what continuous data looks like. Now you've also got a tally, so the tally is just as many of those things occur, and the frequency is conversion from the tally. If you don't know how the tally works, every fifth line you draw a line through it to signify 5. After we talked about class intervals, so these are what class intervals are here, which are different sections, we then talked about the 3 types of frequency. You've got frequency, which is just the number of things, how many people, how many times a particular category was chosen, or how many number 3s are there, or whatever. Relative frequency is a frequency as a fraction of the total value. So you need to know this total value to get the relative frequency there. So if you take 20 divided by 40, that's 50, so 0 is half, so 0.5. So these are just the relative frequencies. And the percentage frequencies, if you take this, you multiply it by 100, that'll give you 5%, 17.56%. I told you guys to be aware that due to the nature of rounding and stuff, if this number doesn't add to 100, don't be too stressed. Don't be like, oh my God, this is the end of the world. It's supposed to add to 100, but if it doesn't exactly add to 100, don't panic. It may just add to 99.5 or 99 or maybe 102. Doesn't matter exactly, as long as it's close to 100. If you're asked, of course, in a question to find out the relative frequency, or the percentage frequency, and you happen to know like all the other ones, if you happen to be like, if you get asked, well, what is the percentage frequency? You go A, B, C, D, and this is 20%, 30%, 40%, then you can pretty much figure out that D is going to have to be 10% because it's the only way you can add to 100%. So that's the type of question that you could go, that I could give you guys. So I'm just trying to teach you guys to be aware that it's just a different way of thinking about it. Now, with the last thing we did, we looked at which one is better, and you pretty much almost everyone said this one's better, and then I said no, actually, it's not better. It's actually the one on the right is better, because the one on the right, even though it looks a bit weird and a bit unusual, it's better because it means that we clearly know where sections go. Ultimately, this line means that it goes all the way up to 5, but not quite 5. It's like 4.99999, and this one would be 9.9999 onwards, like pretty much from infinity. You could not get a number, like if you got 5, if you got 10, it would tick over. And so that's why and then we did an example using these frequencies here. Today what we're going to do is we're going to explore reporting on data. Now this is actually a pretty short lesson in that there's not many slides, but it's a pretty intense lesson because there's a fair bit of writing to do. And it's actually, but don't worry, because unlike other lessons, I'm actually going to be doing some of the writing with you guys. So I'll show you what I mean. Reporting on data. So when we report on data, when we report on data, we have to sort of, what we're actually talking about is we're talking about how do we sort of express what's written down? How can we summarize data? So it's a little bit like taking it's almost like the opposite to what we do in most questions. It's like taking the information out of the graphs and out of the tables and turning it into words. So let's talk about what are the important things you need to sort of outline when you report on data. And I don't want you to copy down what's on the right here. I just want you to copy down the left. So who is being surveyed and about what? So that's the very first thing you need to talk about when you're reporting on data. Who's being surveyed and about what? Are we surveying children about their favorite anime shows? Are we surveying adults about what type of car they drive? Are we talking to, women about what they prefer, what type of alcohol they prefer? Are we talking to men about what type of cheeseburger they like, whatever, That's what we want to know. A good way to start is usually, what does the majority think? Like that's where you would start. It's like, what do the most people think this or whatever? And then what does everyone else think? It's literally writing down, by the way, ladies and gents. He's literally writing down just the amounts of things. It's not even really that difficult to do. The difficulty, I guess, with these types of questions come with, I guess, knowing how to do it efficiently so you don't waste time during a test. Now, for some people saying that when I said there's no difficulty here, it's just copying things down. For some people that aren't necessarily native English speakers or aren't very good at writing, this is going to be very difficult because I know that for you guys, it's like, I thought that I would never have to do anything like this in maths. Well, turns out you do, because what this does is it shows me your understanding. Now there are some shortcuts. You can use roughly, so for example, some shortcuts that they use a lot, and I'm showing you these shortcuts because they show up in the questions that you guys are going to have to do from 2C, but some of them are, You can use roughly half, you can use roughly a quarter or a half for 50% and 25%. So if you have 52% of people say they like this one particular brand of cornflakes, then that's what you would say. You say roughly half of people think this. It's just another way you can do it. You can combine different percentages by saying roughly the same number of people said this or this, or there's another way you can say blah and blah are almost evenly split at, and you can then mention the number that they are evenly split at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you guys with this in a second. I'm going to get out my little dog out of the room. Oh, you going to stop down? Are you going to stop whining? Good. Oh, in your bed. Lie down. Good job. Good job. Yeah. Okay. So let me look at this little example that I did on the right. I just whacked this together last night, so it's not super pretty, but it's just like, let's look at how these type. I thought to myself, it's a bit silly to have this slide and not actually talk about what the heck it means. So I thought I'd better put a little bit on the right. So it says here we've got jam 10, Nutella 10, Vegemite 4, 8, peanut butter 4, butter 4, nothing 3. So then let's read what it says that I wrote down here. And this is, that's going to be the perfect prose, whatever. When asked about your favorite toast topping, the majority of people were split, okay, between jam 10 and Nutella 10. So let's look at this. I've said, what are they being surveyed about? Who are being surveyed and about what? Have I done that? When asked what your favorite toast toppings, when asked about when asked what was your favorite toast topping. So there you go. That's who and what. The majority of people, the next part is, of course, to talk about, well, what's going to be the majority of people? The majority of people were split. Now, notice how I've actually used a bit of a shortcut. I've said we're split between jam and Nutella. So the reason I've done it like that is because then I don't have to go back and say the majority of people said 10 people like jam and 10 people like Nutella. I can just sort of combine the same phrase in one. And usually if you have two numbers that are really, really close, then it's a really quick and easy way to do it. We've got another example here, so we go. And what does everyone else think? Well, what does everyone else think? 8 people said Vegemite, so that's literally just, this is 8, this is Vegemite, put it down there. And then peanut butter, and nothing were almost evenly split at 4. Now I said almost evenly split because if you look at nothing, nothing's 3, not 4. You might be saying, sir, can you do that? Like, can you get away with that? And I'm like, yes, I can, because I said almost. I put a quantifier there. You could say instead that peanut butter, and nothing were roughly the same number. Or you could even say, peanut butter and butter were had the same amount of people, 4, and then whereas nothing had roughly the same number at 3. Roughly the same number said nothing, and then you could put in brackets 3. And that's how you would do, that's how you report on data. This is how you might report on data written straight from a frequency table. Now, of course, you don't have to just use a frequency table. We're going to do one more example on this. We're actually going to make it ourselves. So unlike ripping apart one of my ones, we're going to do our own one. We're going to do this relatively quickly. I'm going to give you guys a chance to work on some of these examples. So let's have a look at one of the examples. Let's go have a look at this one here. A sample of 200 people were asked to comment on the statement, advanced forms of life exist somewhere in the universe, by selecting one of the options. Definitely don't exist, probably don't exist, probably exist, definitely exist, or don't know. The data is summarized in the following graphs following frequency table and bar chart. Write a report summarizing the findings of this investigation, quoting appropriate percentages to support your conclusion. All right. Now, I haven't put a pencil up here because I'm like, we're going to do this, we're going to do a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of text here, and you need this text here and this text here. You guys are more than welcome to write down write this report down as we go. It might not necessarily make sense. You could maybe jot down some of this here, but I'm just going to go through it anyway, and I'm hoping that you guys can watch me do this so that when you actually get to doing the same thing yourself, it makes a bit more sense. So let's have a look here. So let's have a look at the numbers and the graph here. Just get, like, before we even start, let's get an idea. So it says here that you know, we've got like, oh, it looks like we've got 9 to 19% of people thinking that they don't exist, whereas we've got a 32% saying they probably exist and 26% saying they definitely exist. Oh, that 26%, that's almost the same as 25%. So I might say roughly a quarter of people think they definitely exist. And then we've got 14% of people saying they don't know. That's okay. We can use that. We might even use that at the very end and just say the remainder of people said they did not. They don't know. Okay, and then we can look at the table. The table here is exactly the same information. It's just done graphically. We can see that, you know, you can see here very clearly that the highest peaked one is probably exists, followed by definitely exists. So they're definitely the majority here. And the majority is quite easily here at probably exists. So let's start writing. The first thing that we need to do is we need to say who is being surveyed and about what. Okay. So how will I do that? Well, I'm going to start that here. I'm going to do that in maroon because I did that in red last time. I'm going to write this. 200 people were asked to respond to the comment advanced forms of life exist somewhere in the universe. Now, if you guys are looking at that and saying, so you just copied down exactly what you have written at the top, you're like, yeah, I pretty much did. Guess what the questions do? Pretty much copy what exactly they wrote down. It's not like rocket science here, ladies and gents. You can just copy things down. Next one is in green. Now, in green, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the majority. I guess the easiest way would be to start off by talking about the majority. The majority of people agree with this statement. Now, what I've done here is I haven't actually said like any figures. I'm just saying this is like the majority. Most people agree. You could even, if you really wanted to, get a little bit fancy and say, oh, you could say the majority of people, more than 50%, because if you look at that, 32 plus 26, you could say more than 50%. You could even say, like, if you really wanted to do, you could say 58% of people agree with this statement. So the majority of people agree with this statement with 32% of people saying they probably exist and another quarter saying definitely exist. Sorry, I always spell definitely wrong. All right, so we've now talked about the majority. We've talked about and we've done that in I would say in a pretty quick way. I'm sorry if you guys can't read my writing very well. And you notice here another quarter. Of course, this 26% isn't exactly a quarter, but I'm like, it's close enough. And that's why as well, I put 26% in brackets here, just so it's very clear that I'm actually cheating here. But if you were reading this as a news article, you would be like, oh yeah, okay, a quarter, roughly 25%. Was it actually 26%? You'd be like, whatever. Let's finish this up by talking about the people that disagree. We're going to do that in blue. What does everyone else think? I'm going to run out of room here, ladies and gents, but so you have to bear with me, but that's all right. We're going to go with we're just going to say 19% of people said they probably don't exist, and the least selected, let's write that down, and the least selected opinion was definitely don't exist. See, I always try to put an E there, define, but it's actually DEFINIT. There's another I there. Definitely don't exist at 9%. And then because I'm feeling lazy here, I'm just going to write like the last little bit, the remainder answered don't know. Done. And you can see here why. I mean, these questions do take a little bit of time to do. And so one of the things you should pay attention to, if you ever, when you see these types of questions at a test or an exam, is actually what I would tend to do, to be 100% honest with you, is I would check to see how much these guys are marked out of. These guys look like they take a long time to do. If you're busting your butt to get like 2 marks, I would actually just skip a question like this. But if you've got time, you guys can do these types of questions. They are actually not difficult. They are 3 marks. What you should also pay attention to is that try and do as many shortcuts as possible. Combine percentages if you can. As you can say, if it turned out that the same number of people said they probably exist and probably don't exist, then you would just combine them together. Notice how I said the remainder answered don't know, because then I don't have to write down 14%. I don't have to look it up. I can just write it down. I'm trying to write this down as succinctly, which means, if you don't know what the word succinctly, as short as possible. But if you look at all that text, this is as quick as I could write it down, in my personal opinion here. There might be some extra shortcuts. Some questions coming in from some people saying, what if there are 20 choices? Do you have to report on each of them? Okay, good question. What if there are 20 choices? First things first, no, we're not going to give you 20 choices. If you did have 20 choices, you would have to comment on all of them. But I bet there will probably be a way that's when you would start to try and combine them together. If there was like something like 20 choices, you could just be like vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry were equally answered by all participants or something at whatever. And you can combine a couple of them together. But you can't really, you might be able to say, or if they're already in groups, you might be able to say all of these people, all of the months after October had a percentage of 2% or something like that. So then you don't have to write down October, November, December. You could just write down a phrase like that. But there are shortcuts you can do, but yeah, if you did have 20 of them, you would have to do that. But that's, let's have a look, see, there's one more question. Thank goodness. Yeah, we're not going to be that cruel to you and give you guys huge data sets that have like massive lots of things. 4 would probably be the, actually this is 5. I reckon 5 would be the most. You may get 6, which has an extra one that don't know, but I usually just write this statement at the end. In fact, when I looked at the example from the textbook, because I modeled this a little bit off the example from the textbook, they didn't even write the remainder that said don't know. They just thought, oh yeah, we'll let the reader figure it out. I'm like, I feel like you should put that in there. Let's have a look here. What time have we got? Okay, we're about at 9:50. So what I'm going to do now is this. I'm actually going to look at a couple more slides. I was going to do another example, but I'm like, that took a long time for me to do. I think most of you guys probably get the gist of it. But what I wanted to do here is I wanted to show you guys this. So this is summarizing data. But what I wanted to show you guys was this idea here. And this is actually something that this example was taken from the Australian Values Survey of 2018. I remember I found this last year and I was like, thought this was actually quite interesting. So Australian values is like, what do Australians think is important? So I wanted to show you how a proper business might look at doing something like this. Australians also report mixed but largely centrist views on appropriate limits to immigration. More than 90% of respondents selected either of the 2 most moderate options, provided 45% believe that the government should continue to allow immigrants to come to Australia as long as there are jobs available. 46% say believing the government should place strict limits on who moves to Australia. Just 1 in 27%. Just 1 in 27% believe that Australia should take any immigrant who wants to enter the country, and only 2% of people believe we should prohibit all migration to Australia. So people moving to Australia. I thought it was a typo, but it's not. So let's break this down just a little bit just to sort of see what this talks about. So, Australia reports largely centrist views, more than 90% largely centrist, which means that it's mostly in the center. Is that what we see here? Yes, it is. They're mostly in the center. More than 90% of respondents selected the 2 most moderate options. So these 2 here. So this is very similar to what I said when you look at this. Is like the majority of people agree with this statement, right? That's pretty much the same sort of thing. I said, oh, look, it looks like the majority of people are in this area. And I'm sort of reporting on the fact that I know the majority of people are in that area. And what they said is this time is the majority of people actually select the most moderate options. You could say the same thing if it turned out that probably exist and probably don't exist were the most popular. You could say the majority of people were not definite in their answer, or were not certain of their answer, whatever, I don't know. 45% of the government said, and let's go look at this. So now I'm going to change the color again. I'm going to go look at this. 45% of people say the government should continue to allow immigration as long as there are jobs. Or 46 believe, and you can sort of see, okay, yep. So these numbers here, If you add 46 plus 45, shock horror, you actually get 91, not 90%. That doesn't mean that we've actually got a problem here, because if you read that, it says more than 90%. And 90% is just a good number to choose. It said more than 90%. That's why I suggested in here you could actually say more than half think that agree with this statement would actually be a really good thing to say here, because you can see this is 32 plus 25 is 58, more than half. And that would be a way, and that would be a way to sort of refer to the whole thing. As long as there are jobs available, if you keep reading here, just over 1 in 20. Now, if we look at one, this is an interesting statement here. Just over 1 in 20, because if you think about this, is what they're trying to do here is they're trying to give you something to compare it to. You say just more than 1 in 20, so you think if there are 20 people, 1 in those 20 people agrees with this statement, which is 7%. So what is 1 in 20? Just quickly, 1 in 20 is actually 5%. So if you look here, it's actually 7. So, yeah, sure, it is 1 in that is just over it. I'm not expecting you guys to do anything fancy like that. You could say 1 in 10 people, and that's what they do. If you look at if you watch TV ads and stuff, and they say 3 in 10 people think that Olay made nature masks has changed their life. You go, well, 3 in 10. They're just trying to say 30%, but they're trying to say it in a fancy way, in a way that doesn't scare people. If you see someone say 2 in 5 people, then you're going, oh, well, that's 2 out of 5 is 40%. They're just trying to mention these percentages. Just 1 in 20, which is about 7%, believe that. I mean, any immigrant who wants to come to the country should, with only 2%. And notice how they see the smallest one to the very last, should prohibit all immigration. And then that one's just a straight up here. Now, the other reason why I think I put this one up is because I also like to talk about this. It's just general. And so I think, firstly, let's talk about this, as I think this is a pretty succinct way to refer to this data down the bottom here. What they've tried to do is to try to give you guys a bit more of a little bit of an analysis as well. They've sort of said more than 90, so you get an idea of, wow, that's like most people are thinking that these two things here. And then they sort of talk about how the other ones are, and I think that's a pretty good way to pretty much show what we've just done, but how they've done it. And so, and a lot of, and what you'll find is that a lot of government documents will have these kinds of explanations in them. The reason that they put these explanations in them is not everyone is necessarily numeracy literate. Not everyone can actually go, oh, I can look at this graph and understand because I can look at this graph down the bottom and say, yeah, that makes sense. Most people aren't going too extreme. Maybe there are more people on the prohibit stop immigration than allow immigration, but it's pretty much roughly about half and half is sort of what I would sort of get. With most people really not being super duper passionate either way. But what they will do is that for people that aren't necessarily numeracy literate, for those people that are not that good at looking at a graph and understanding it, they provide this text. And this text essentially gives people a way that they can pull out that important information without needing the text. It's also really good as well if you think about a person, like let's talk about a little bit about disabilities. If you're talking to someone who's blind, they won't be able to see these graphs. So they will rely on the text to speech from this text. So they will rely on listening to this so that they know, or if someone's visually impaired, so that they know what this graph looks like. Because if you can't see the graph, then it's going to be very difficult for you to understand what's going on here. What I would normally do at this point is I would actually also, let's talk about just quickly the idea in general. What do you guys, what do we think about this? Well, personally, I think that I sort of am more on the opinion that immigration should be allowed. I have been very much, I'm very much sort of think that um, Australia thrives best when it's a multicultural society. And of course, I'm teaching at Braybrook College, which is probably the most multicultural school in the state. We've got pretty much every single pretty much everyone is represented, and I really think that immigration is a good thing. I think we should definitely. I think we've got plenty of room, but and this is one of the reasons why I've always been a little bit against well, not a little bit, a fair bit against all detention camps and stuff like that. I think that immigration is such an important thing for us all. We just need to start recognizing that like refugees are human beings. Like they're not criminals. They're just trying to get to a better place. And so I would definitely be off the side of, let's let them in. Even if there are jobs, if they need our protection, we should let them in. But that's a personal opinion. Obviously, don't write that down on a test. But I'll just throw that out there just as, a bit of a discussion point. You guys can disagree with me if you want. What I then would do here, I'm actually not going to do. I'm not going to actually talk about this, but what I would do is we're not actually going to do this ourselves. You guys might want to do this later on. Below is a list of organizations for which each one, please indicate. So it's talking about how much people trust the elections, or how much confidence they have. Please indicate how much confidence you have in them. So they had to indicate how much confidence they have in the election. So like, do people think that elections work? And 6,000 people were surveyed. So what we would do is we would do a similar sort of thing to what we did before. 6,000 people were surveyed. More than half, I would say, I would do that. Would say more than half have confidence in the have a high confidence in the. So I would say something like more than half have a high confidence in government run elections. And then I would then break that down further. I'd then say with 15% having quite a lot and 44%. And then I would go into blah, 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 great, more and more detail. And I would actually go through it with you guys. And what I like to do with this topic, and I'm not going to do that with you guys today because I've already been talking for a long time. What I would do is I then pop open this to sort of compare these to my answer to what they said. So happily we have quite high rates of confidence in the administration of our election. Asked for the first time in 2018, 15% of Australians have a great deal of confidence, and a further 44% have quite a lot of confidence. Notice this is actually pretty much exactly how I've taught you guys how to do this. They say what the question was asked. They've done it in a fancy way. Instead of saying 6,000 people were asked to respond to this, they've said happily we have they're actually pretty much quite a high rates of confidence in administration of our elections. They've said it, but they've done it in like a little bit of a different way, a sort of back answered thing. Asked for the first time in 2018, 15% of people say great. So they did, and they talk about who agrees, and a further 44% say they had great confidence. Trust in an honest, accountable electoral admission and administration is fundamental well-functioning democracy. So it doesn't actually talk about the non-functioning, non-agreeing answers here. They may be like, oh, well, this is a government document. Let's not dwell on these numbers here. So this could be a political move. It might be in the next paragraph they talk about that. But I would just assume that they just said, they were just trying to give a general idea of what was going on. So that's why they probably didn't say these last two here.